We are live.
I'd like to call the meeting to order this morning and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 41st Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Brent McIntyre, and I'll be chairing the hearing this morning. To my right is Ian Mann, and zooming in is Linda McFadgen. Our assessor for today's hearing is Darren Ducharme, and our administrative personnel is Belhan Rojo. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note that you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along in the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all of the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 7 on our docket today. Ms. Rojo, please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony. Thank you.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Darren Charles Ducharme.
And you affirm the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Brenner.
And you affirm the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. The first property on the docket today is 175 Portage Avenue East, and either party, are there any preliminary issues? No. Okay, Darren, you can proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. The call number is 22-2928. Roll number is 130-605-80400. The address is 175 Portage Avenue East. For the roll year 2023, with a reference date April 1st, 2021, we have an assessed value of $3,034,000. The parcel use is CMRCS, Community Shop Center. Zoning is M, and we have a leasable area on our records at 22,003 square feet. I have a recommendation to decrease the assessed value to $2,916,000. This is based on a decrease in the leasable area, based on the agent's brief, which was confirmed. And I can go into more details on that page 5 if you prefer to wait. Or I could do it now.
Well, no, let's go through the presentation. So it's just a correction of the leasable area?
The leasable area, correct.
Okay, you can continue.
Thank you. So on page 2, we have a parcel view of the subject property in Portage Avenue, which is also facing Lombard to the north. The bottom of the page 2 is an overhead aerial view of the subject property. The top of page 3, another aerial view of the subject property from a different angle. The middle and the bottom of page 3, we have some street view photos of the subject property. So these are photos of the subject property, but it's really the lower level that we're valuing on this building. So I apologize in advance. Maybe if we could go to my last page on page 24, just to get a better understanding of what we're going to be discussing. And this is also in the agent's brief as well. This is part of the submission that they do for the mailer. So I just thought it was important for you to see that the leasable areas that are being assessed, which are located within the red square that this area serves. This particular area serves the Fairmont Hotel above, also the Richardson building next door, and the Grain Exchange building as well. It also connects to the concourse via 360 Main. So I thank you for that. Maybe we can get you back to page 4 of my brief. I just thought that would be beneficial.
Yeah, that's fine.
On page 4 at the top, we have the subject sales history. There's no sales history for this subject property. And below that are the rent comparables. The comparable one at 333 St. Mary Avenue is located on the main floor of City Place. City Place is located in an adjacent neighborhood to the subject property between Donald and Hargrave Streets. City Place consists of retail space on the first two levels with 5 levels of office space above. It's zoned M, which is the same as subject property. The 2 comparables at 360 Main Street are located in the lower level concourse of Winnipeg Square, which also connects or links to the subject property. That is, you can walk from these comparables to the subject property in the same concourse system. And also the operating hours are similar to the subject property, 9 to 4. Some are open Saturdays and they're closed Sundays. As well, the previous comparable 333 St. Mary is also open 10 to 6, Monday to Saturday. They're open, which is similar to the subject. They're also open Sundays 12 to 5. The comparable at 393 Portage is located within Portage Place Mall, which has the same parcel use as a subject, CMRCS, the same zoning as a subject dam, and is in close proximity. That is in an adjacent neighborhood to the subject property. This comparable is located on the main floor, and the hours at the mall are Monday to Saturday, 10 to 6, and which is similar to subject property, and Sunday, 12 to 5. On page 5 is our subject property market income summary. So the leasable area has been changed from 22,003 square feet to 21,185 square feet. And this changed the potential rent from $321,000 to $636 to $309,212. The vacancy loss remains the same at 15%. Expenses remain the same at 3%. Shortfall remains the same at $16 per square foot. The net operating income changed from $212,000 to $382 to $204,101. The cap rate remains the same at 7%. And the capitalized value changed from $3,034,029 to $2,915,729. So giving an estimated value of $2,916,000 rounded from $3,034,000. On page 6 are our capitalization rates chart. You'll note that we have applied a cap rate of 7% for the subject property, which is near or above the 80th percentile for all reports for retail. On page 7 are our municipal assessment excerpts. Pages 8 through 24 are the return 2020 income and expense mailers received from the owners. that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, how do you feel about the recommendation?
We'll need to discuss further.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate Mr. Ducharme taking the time.
Do you have any questions?
I do. Mr. Ducharme, can we initially go very briefly to your page 4? These are the rent comparables.
Yeah.
And you've set out the information very clearly, so appreciate that. Now, 353 St. Mary, that's City Place. That's a significant City Place and Portage Place specifically are the 2 significant regional shopping centers in the downtown area, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then 360 Main, that's the concourse level below the 360 Main office tower and the what's being constructed as the apartment buildings there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. On page 5, just due to the rents, both before you adjusted the areas and now with the slightly lower area, those rents are model driven, are they?
Yes.
Okay. And the parameters, saving except for the 15% vacancy, I believe that was not parameters, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3% and the 7% cap rate and the 3% expenses, those are also model driven, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now the model, I apologize, what's the total potential income with the lower area that you've now calculated?
Potential income 309,212.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I should have written that down. So 309,212. So if we could then go to your page, briefly to your page 19, please. And you've alluded to this. This is the income expense questionnaire that's sent in to the department by the owners. We can agree, though, that the actual rent is located at the top of page 19. The actual year to date, which the fiscal year end, is roughly $200,000, being the first two items, correct? 195,863 plus the 5101.
I see that. Yes.
Okay. And if you haven't, that's fine. But did you have a chance to review the rental information as to the rents being achieved at the subject?
Yes, I did for each. I kind of compared each individual premise. I did go through, and in general, ours were higher. Some were close.
Okay, I agree with that assessment. Some were close. It suggests several were higher, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Linda, any questions? Oh, you're
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
thank you. Ian?
No, thank you. No questions.
And I have no questions. So Carrie, you can proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issues in this case distill to 3. There are concerns we have with respect to the potential net rent. There's concerns we have with respect to the non-recoverable expenses. I'll talk very, very briefly on that. Spare the board a lot of detail on that, and capitalization rates. So, and I appreciate Mr. Ducharme taking the time to look at the leasable area and make the recommendation. This is then if we can turn briefly to my page 8. And with the Mr. Ducharme's gone through that floor plan, so I won't go through that further. That actually provides an excellent representation of what we're talking about here. But on page 8 at the top, this is the Richardson Center concourse. I'm guessing that the board members, Mr. Ducharme, are quite familiar with it. The difficulty I have with comparing the rents, and I'll go through the rental rates being achieved in a second, but when we're talking about Portage Place, which obviously has had its own difficulties, but at the same time, it's obviously a very significant retail shopping center, very different set of considerations for that property and for City Place as well. These are developed and operating as very significant retail nodes, whereas this concourse level assessment that we're talking about this morning, this is essentially a set of businesses that are primarily serving the folks in the Richardson building and as well the folks in the Fairmont. What I can tell you though, if the board's familiar with it, this is of course, the concourse level is right at as you're heading east, effectively down, in the lower levels to the river, essentially to Red River. It dead ends with the parkade. So this isn't a case where you've got a lot of through traffic. This is more of a destination. And the folks that are walking around through this 360 main concourse, through all the shops there, the folks that are walking around through City Place, I mean, those are all very, very significant retail establishments in and of themselves. Whereas this is essentially a set of businesses where the folks from the Richardson Center are going down to the concourse level to get to the parkade to get to their cars. So the foot traffic just simply isn't there based on the location and configuration of the subject. Now, what happens if we go briefly to page 13? I mentioned that one of the more significant issues relates to the rent. We're a little closer now with Mr. Ducharme's recommendation, but we're still out by, in very rough terms, about $50,000. The rents being achieved in this segment of the concourse, Mr. Chairman, reflect the location and, quite bluntly, the significant difficulties in having these retail tenants remain viable. And that was exacerbated for obvious reasons through the pandemic. When you look at the rent roll on top of page 13, and I've summarized it there, you can see the blue shaded entries are the market rents we've applied, and we believe that we're certainly being very fair with that. The rents being achieved, though, when you look through the actual rents that are in place, range from, there's one rent at $19 for Vantage Productions for a small unit, but the rest of them range from between $7.50 a foot up to $17 a foot, with most of them in the 10 to 14 range. And there's a reason for that. The lease dates, mind you, some of these lease dates are older, I get that. But if anything, the environment, as of the reference date with the pandemic and the particularly difficult situations these tenants found themselves in, the market, if anything, would be more negative still in my submission. The calculation that we've provided there is based on the rents being achieved and the market rents, as I've noted, between $12 and $15 a foot. And we certainly believe that those rents are optimistic, but we're trying to assess this as a reasonably good entity, notwithstanding the issues they've had. So with the $254,443 rent, using the market rents we've applied there, along with the other rents being achieved, we've applied that rent along with actually a vacancy allowance that's just a tick lower than what the department's got. We've applied the bottom of page 13, we've got the historical vacancies. Again, these vacancies are a function of the fact that it is difficult for many businesses to make a go of it there, and they range from a low of 10.8% in 2017 to a high of 19.6% in 2015. But as you can see, as of the reference date, the vacancy had been creeping up again to the 17.5%. We've applied a stabilized allowance, in this case, of 12.5%. I'll talk about cap rate and the non-recoverable expenses in a minute, but if I might ask the board and Mr. Ducharme to go to page 15 then, temporarily. So we've applied in our valuation the potential market rent at $254,443. Again, if you look at what was actually received, if you recall, it's closer to $200,000 in the 2020 fiscal year. So the 254 using a 12.5% vacancy, we've applied a shortfall rate of $18 a foot, and that's based on the actual CAM and tax recoveries in 2020 were $18.12. So we've applied a slightly higher rate of $18 in our valuation. The non-recoverable expense of 5%, to talk about that briefly in a minute. And because of the unique nature of this asset, we're suggesting a cap rate, an elevated cap rate here to some extent of 7.25%, reflecting the ongoing and known risk involved with this income stream, reflected in no small part in the vacancies that were being experienced and also in the rents that were able to be achieved with the subject. So then we come in, as you can see there, at a value of $2,198,000 rounded. So if I might ask the board and Mr. Ducharme briefly, then I just wanted to point out a couple of things in my attachments, and then I'll move on to the non-recoverable expense study. If we could turn briefly to page 30, please. So this is the income statement. It's the same income statement that Mr. Ducharme submitted, and I just wanted to point out again, the actual rental revenue received, and I'm rounding it, is going to be about 201,000 in 2020. And then moving forward to page 40. Page 40 being the 2019 statement, and there again at the top of page 40 with the revenues, you'll see that the rent being achieved, both the gross rent and net rents together, sum total of those two was 202,394. So certainly we believe what's at 254,000. It does, in our respectful submission, represent a very optimistic stabilized income, but that is the income we applied this morning. Then going briefly, if we might, to the non-recoverable expense study, and let me know, Mr. Chairman, when you've got it. And if, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I propose to go through this once and then have the comments carried forward, if I might.
That's fine. Linda, do you have it? Oh, you're muted again.
Yes, I have it.
Thank you. Darren, you got it?
Yep.
Ian?
Yep, got it.
And I have it, so you may proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So on, and I'm going to go through this, as I say, at a very high level. On page 2, the expense allowance we're talking about has historically been known as the management fee, but in our respectful submission, it relates to the non-recoverable expenses that are not recovered under any circumstances from tenants, even those tenants under triple net leases. And at the bottom of page 2, there's an excerpt from the assessor's previous publications, their previous manuals, and it states under the heading management, even with net leases and competent management, there still will be expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from the tenants. Examples of these are processing payments and chasing bad debts. And in our submission, you'll see it. There's actually primarily 3 components. It's the leasing commissions, the marketing expenses, and the professional fees. So it's those 3 items we're talking about. Then, and there's more, certainly more verbiage around that, but I'll skip over to page 4, please. And this is from the appraisal materials that we've compiled. And at the bottom of page 4, second last paragraph, it states that the appraisal should also account for non-recoverable expenses. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. So to be clear, we're not including, we've provided information relating to the stabilized expenses that includes TIs, but we're not relying on that. We're providing that information. We, in our submission, have not factored in tenant improvement or tenant inducements in our stabilized amounts that we've calculated for the purposes of our submission. So then if we move to let's go to page 7, please. And this is from the Saskatchewan Municipal Assessment Authority. They also talk about non-recoverable expenses. And they list at the top of page 7, they list 4 of them: legal and audit fees, structural repairs, which to be clear is the expense item that we are including as the 2%, what's historically been known as the other expense, or the 2%. So that's where we believe we're covering off structural repairs. Then we've got advertising and promotion and leasing commissions, which are the 2 other items that we're including in our analysis. So then if we skip over to page 10, as I indicated earlier, in the middle of that page, there's 4 items that we have considered in our analysis: leasing commissions, professional fees, asset management fees where applicable. In most cases, they don't apply. And advertising and marketing. So it's those 4 core expenses, primarily the 3. Asset management fees are very rare. And so then on page 11, we've got our chart with our stabilized amounts, and this is either typically over a 5 or 6 year period. What tends to happen, Mr. Chairman, you can appreciate that while the professional fees are typically quite quite stable year over year. What can fluctuate greatly is leasing commissions, because if a landlord has got a significant vacancy that they have to fill, and if that vacancy, of course, they have to pay a commission to the broker that is obtaining a tenant for that space. And if they choose not to amortize the leasing commission over the term of that lease, then, and if they claim it all in the first year entirely, that will result in a very, very high level of expense for that particular year, and then it'll go down significantly after that. Some landlords do actually amortize the commissions over the term of the lease to more accurately reflect the expense, match the expense relative to the income being received. But most landlords, in our experience, simply list the entire real estate commission in the year that it's paid, and therefore it can result in these very significant variations. So on page 11, we've stabilized, as you can see, not in the right-hand column, but in the second from right-hand column. There's the averages. It says 3-year averages. That's incorrect. It's typically between 5 and 6 years now with this study, and it's not including the TIs. And as you can see there, it ranges from a low of 2.6% to a high of 16.23%, with an average of 6.64 and a median of 5.98%. The averages and median, of course, are much higher when one looks at the same expenses, but including the tenant inducements. But we are not relying, we're providing that information, but we're not relying on it. So the only other item I wanted to bring to the board's attention, and this is new for this assessment cycle, starting at page 12, is the direct relationship between the non-recoverable expenses and the capitalization rates. Altus has in their all capitalization rate studies, we have included the full 5% non-recoverable allowance. And the mathematical effect of either removing or reducing that allowance, either from 5% to 0 or 5% to 1%, has the direct effect of indicating a significantly higher capitalization rate. So there's an inverse relationship between the level of non-recoverable expense and the capitalization rate based on our analysis, which does include the full 5%. I've given 3 scenarios to illustrate this, starting at page 13. 13, 14, and 15 are the 3 scenarios. In these scenarios, the exact same valuation assumptions are applied, save and except for differences in the non-recoverable expense item. So as you can see on page 13, including with the assumptions for the valuation as we've set forth there, when one includes the full 5% allowance, the indicated capitalization rate is 7.38%. If one then turns to page 14, using those very exact same parameters, except for reducing the non-recoverable expense to 0, the capitalization rate, indicated cap rate, then increases to 7.79% from 7.38. So it's 41 basis point increase. And probably what's most germane to our discussion, on page 15, we show the effect of reducing the non-recoverable expense from 5% to 1%. Again, leaving all of the other valuation assumptions exactly the same. And it has the effect of increasing the cap rate from 7.38 to 7.71%. So it's an increase of 33 basis points. So based on the way that we've conducted our analysis for our capitalization rates, including the retail analysis, then if this board were so inclined to reduce the management, or shouldn't say management, the non-recoverable expense from 5% to 1%, then we are requesting that the requested capitalization rate be increased by 25 basis points, notwithstanding that the actual mathematical effect is a little bit higher. So with that then being said, if I can go briefly to the retail capitalization rate study.
Linda, do you have it?
Yes, I do.
Aaron?
Yes.
Do you have it? And I have it, so proceed.
Thank you. And again, I know that we've been through this on several occasions, so I'm going to take it at a fairly high level. If we could turn initially to page 5, please. So this is, we've got some commentary around the pre-pandemic environment. And there was a very interesting article that involved RioCan, and this is now towards the middle of page 5. RioCan is, of course, Canada's largest retail REIT. They announced the sale of 100 properties, and it was an interesting commentary by Colliers, who was involved with it, and said, and this is now the 3rd indented paragraph, if guidance for the future for retail in Canada is to be taken from this change in direction for RioCan, it may be that retail as an asset class is a questionable focus, given RioCan's move towards a more diversified portfolio that will include residential. In the next paragraph, it says, in essence, RioCan's moving away from retail as a focus and is now looking to become entrenched in the type of live, work, play lifestyle centers that have been topical over the past number of years, not least of which is because of the potential headwinds retailers may face. So the pre-pandemic environment certainly was, there were some concerns with the retail environment. And on page 8, then, or sort of page 6, we talk about the trends involving brick and mortar retail models with lower footprints as the online commercial business continue to increase. We talk on pages 6 and 7 about some very significant retail failures, things like Sears, Target, the merger of Best Buy and Future Shop. That wasn't a failure, but certainly it resulted, that merger, in the closure of a number of stores, Lowe's, Rona, and others. And certainly the mid-box market is at the bottom of page 6 and top of page 7. The mid-box market was quite significantly impacted. But the corollary to the trend of the bricks and mortar, of course, relates to the e-commerce. And on page 7 in the indented paragraph, there's an addition or an article from Property Biz Canada, and it states that e-retail sales are increasing by about 8% per year, while overall retail sales are increasing by only 1.5%, and some retailers are changing their business models as part of the trend. Staples, Best Buy, and Future Shop are really looking to reduce the size of their stores from up to 25,000 feet to as few as 8,000, which will affect numerous shopping centers across the country. Right now, it's still a very minor portion of overall retail sales being the e-commerce, but if it's growing at that rate, it's going to start having an effect over the next 2 to 3 years. So you had that sort of leading up to the pandemic. And of course, as we'll talk about in a minute, the pandemic, I believe the wording was, I don't remember the exact wording, it's to the effect it was essentially skyrocketed through necessity when the pandemic hit. So on page 8, we start talking about the pandemic and the further significant shifts, I should say, affecting the retail environment resulting from the pandemic. And at the bottom of page 8, there's an article from University Canada West that stated the COVID-19 pandemic's changed how we buy things. With so many people staying home and most brick and mortar stores closed due to the mandated closures, we've been shopping less overall. But when we do shop, it's been increasingly from computers, tablets, and phones. In March 2020, the most recent month with available information, Canada retail e-commerce sales totaled 2.2 billion, up 40.4% from a year ago. That was despite a drop of 10% in retail sales overall. So you had, of course, the online purchasing rising dramatically, while at the same time the overall retail sales were declining. At the bottom of page 9, then, and there's a chart on page 9 that talks about this trend, but I did want to draw to the board's attention at the bottom of page 9, the second last paragraph. And this is from the Redshift Media survey, and it states that buying habits have dramatically changed since the pandemic began. 85% of Canadians say their shopping behavior has been affected by COVID-19, while 50% report they are making online purchases for typical in-store items. Most importantly, 53% of North Americans say they've changed the way they will shop going forward, indicating that the shifts that have taken place over the pandemic will have lasting impacts on retail. At the bottom of page 10 then, and this is now from the PwC. The PwC puts out an annual publication. It's called Emerging Trends in Real Estate. And in the September 2020 edition, they also talked about this, and this again is the last indented paragraph. States that interviewees are seeing a structural shift in retail, but it's an acceleration of the move toward e-commerce already underway. And so that of course is our very point with the retail environment is that the e-commerce, by necessity through the mandated lockdowns and then through the change, the habits of Canadians that had changed in the way they buy things, was here to stay, certainly. I'm going to then skip to page 14, please. On page 14, this is from an article, and all of these materials, Mr. Chairman, are attached. Should you care to read them, they're attached as appendices to this study. And there was a study by the Retail Insider in January of 21. So this is now when the pandemic was just short of a year in. And it states, as you can see by the highlighted heading there, it states no online store, no revenues. And in that next paragraph states that the retailers that relied solely on sales in stores were rapidly falling. When it all started, everyone was hoping that it would simply come and go. But when the reality hit that this was here to stay for a while, those who believed they would weather it through their savings found themselves with nothing left to weather the second wave. And so that, again, that online shift, and without a significant shift to that business model, there was significant concern as to which of these businesses would continue to make it through the pandemic, as it certainly wore on, going into the first part of 2021 and into the reference date. Now at the bottom, this is the quote I was thinking of at the bottom of page 15 then. And this is from that same article. And there's a quote there that states that transformation in the retail industry has been happening slowly over the past several years, and that's the shift to the online. But the pandemic accelerated the sea change. It was moving slowly before, Hutchison said. We were starting to see, bits and pieces, and it's really just accelerated at warp speed with the pandemic. So that's certainly presents a very significant challenge for the bricks and mortar retail industry as of the reference date. Now, then turning to page 16 and onwards, there was Altus had a chance to conduct 2 surveys of some of the most sophisticated commercial property owners in Canada, not just retail, but retail, office, and industrial as well. These pages relate just to the respondents with the retail holdings, and it was very telling as to their forecast with these. And again, these are the most sophisticated REITs, the REITs and the very large portfolios, who would certainly have a very, very strong acumen as to the retail environment. And on page, we've summarized the results of this survey, and on page page 18, we talk about, at the bottom of page 18, there are cap rate trend expectations. The chart at the bottom of page 18 is for the top quality assets, and the following chart at the top of page 19 is lower quality. In the case of the retail top quality assets, as you can see, there are the conclusions, and there's 2 sets of bars. The darker shaded bar represents the respondents' conclusions based on the survey in November, so later in the year in 2020. And the lighter shaded bars are the respondents or the responses received in June, so roughly 4 months prior to that. And the expectation of these investors was that for top quality assets now, that the cap rates were expected to increase between 25 and 50 basis points, as represented by the very tall bar representing roughly 55% of the respondents that were surveyed had indicated an expected increase in that range. There were other increases that were higher still, less so. There was a few very few that thought that cap rates would decrease, but certainly the overwhelming trend was the expectation was that cap rates would increase between 25 and 50 basis points, and in some cases more. On page 19, the retail lower quality, again, same kind of trend where a significant proportion had thought cap rates would increase between 25 and 50 basis points. But as one might expect, there was also a very significant number, roughly 33%, that thought the rates would actually increase between 50 and 75 basis points. And a significant part, roughly 20%, that actually thought the rates would go up between 75 and 100 basis points. So very, very difficult forecasting being presented by these investors. So then in that context, if we go to page 24, we've got a number of capitalization rates that we've listed there. And again, I've actually presented two different scenarios. The second from the right-hand column represents the capitalization rates as we've calculated them using the full 5% for the non-recoverable. The very last column is the equivalent number that is indicated if one reduces the non-recoverable expense to 1% from 5%, and the constant in there being the 2% structural or other allowance. And so the rates are indicated there. They range from a low of 5.92 to a high of 8.42%, based on the transactions that we've analyzed. So with those considerations in mind, then, if we move back to the subject. And I'm going back now to page 15 of the main brief, please.
Everybody there? Yep.
So recall, Mr. Chairman, that the actual rent being achieved was closer to the $200,000 range. We've applied the $254,000 as a potential rent. And given the significant impacts of the pandemic and particularly with this asset where the mandated shutdowns for of course, part of those shutdowns involve the office building, which is the very market that these tenants serve for significant periods of time. And so those difficulties were only exacerbated as of the reference date because of the pandemic. Between that, the historical vacancies, the very low rents that we're being able to achieve, and the prospect of the pandemic and these very same difficulties continuing on, we're suggesting a capitalization rate in this case of 7.25%. So using the 7.25% based on the parameters we see there, it results in a net operating, indicated value of $2,198,000. The only other thing I'd like to point out, and this is a telling sort of in the very telling indicators to where this situation was with this property as of the reference date. If we turn briefly to page 30. And again, this is going back to that same income statement for 2020. And if you go to the bottom of page 30, you'll see the net operating income, and the net operating income was actually a loss of $107,000 after deduction of the operating costs. And to be clear, there's no mortgage interest in there. There's nothing that wouldn't be considered a proper expense. So this is a true reflection based on the methodology we use here for the purposes of our evaluation of the performance of the property, and it actually is a loss of $170,000 in 2020, and the board need not turn there, but I'm going to also reference, I've included the 2019 income and expense statement, and if you want to take the page number down, it's at page 46, and the loss in 2019 was $36,859. So again, believe the potential rent and the NOI we're calculating is extremely optimistic relative to what was actually happening at the mall, and the 7.25% in that context being very appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll start with any questions regarding the original presentation from Altus. And Darren, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Linda, do you have any questions?
Sorry, folks, no.
No?
Can you hear the fire alarms? They're testing the fire alarms in my building. I'm going crazy.
I could hear it, but I wasn't sure where it was coming from.
Yeah, that's what it is. I have no questions.
No questions, Ian?
I do with respect to a couple of, just for some clarification, page 9 of your brief. Sorry, I'm just looking at back to it was in one of the descriptive paragraphs with respect to the leasable area contain 21,098, but there's 4,400 square feet of non-income producing meeting rooms for the tenants of the Richardson building. This area is inextricably linked towards part of the parcel of the Richardson building. Is that
it is? So it's part and parcel of the complex,
right?
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mann, have you? I'm not sure. So, if you're familiar with the concourse, as you're walking down the escalators from the Richardson building, and you're going towards the to the parkade,
Right.
Those meeting rooms are at the very end on what would be the right hand side, or Gotta think about the direction that would be on the north side there. So those meeting rooms are actually they're used by tenants and they're available for tenants' use and they are part of what we are valuing, notwithstanding that they're not generating any rent, but they certainly are an amenity for tenants.
And are those rents, and I'm looking at now page 13, there's some vacant areas of 4,281 square feet. I'm looking at line 10 on your page 13. The Richardson Center, 4,281 at $11 per square foot. And then immediately above it, 119 square feet at $15 vacant. Are those the meeting rooms or are the meeting rooms in addition to that leased area?
L10 is actually the meeting rooms.
Okay.
Yeah, the other units are vacant and available for lease, so that's L3. L3, L6, L9B, and L16. So those would be the vacant units. L10 is the meeting rooms that we've assigned it, or we've put the rent on at $11, notwithstanding that that's basically an internal rent, but we've applied that in our valuation.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
And that was my question, so that's been answered. Now we'll proceed to questions on the cap rate study and the expense study. Aaron, do you have any questions?
I have no question. No.
Linda?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Ian?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
So just one comment about the cap rates, and is this not an ever moving trend in what's happening to retail?
So sorry,
So we're not
cap rates, or can you explain that a little bit?
Well, on your cap rate study, just let me get to it. You quoted various analysts across Canada and their prediction.
Yes,
Right, it's pure speculation.
it absolutely is. No, I wouldn't say it's speculation. It's a very well-informed projections, but it's based on the trends that they see with their assets. But okay, so that doesn't answer your question yet. I want to understand the question fully, and then I'll.
Well, the question is that this may be more prevalent in future reassessments.
No, I would disagree with that with respect, Mr. Chairman. The reason being, I'm not suggesting the hard data shows this massive uptick yet, because we were Q1 of 2021, we were still in the pandemic. But in November of 2020, what investors were saying is, hey, since basically January, we've seen a whole lot of businesses fail. We've seen a whole lot of businesses come to us for rent relief. We've seen a lot of businesses that are telling us we don't know how much longer we're going to be able to hold, all these things that they're seeing from their tenants. And cap rate, of course, fundamentally is a reflection of risk. And so what they were saying was, based on what we know and based on what we see at that time in late 2020 going ahead, the risk is going to be elevated for retail generally. So inherently, the capitalization rate and the risk, this is a forward-looking measure saying what kind of risk is this income stream going to be at. But when you've got the most sophisticated investors in the country saying, we think based on what we see that cap rates are going to be going up 25, 50, 75 basis points, that's a very good measure of the assessment of that risk. If you're asking whether there was a specific transaction on the reference date that showed that, no, there isn't. But there's very, very good evidence here as to what the people that would have their hands very much have their fingers on the pulse of what's happening are saying. The other thing that was becoming very obvious, and I've talked about this in the study and also borne out through the property, some of the most significant elements of risk relate to things like vacancy rates and the rents that are being able to achieve. And when you see these things that are not improving and in fact are declining, that when you're using the principle of anticipation, you're saying, well, what do I think is going to be happening as of April 1, 2021? What is the outlook? The outlook was not good at all. And certainly, I'd suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, that based on, you have to look as to what's happening at the time and what's been happening over the period of time to make a projection. But that's the very projection that investors are going to be making when they're valuing these things. Therefore, when you look at what's happening here, and particularly when you look at the virtual stoppage of foot traffic for a big part of 2020, and some of the things that were sort of known to be ongoing issues in terms of vacancy rate, the rents that are being collected, there was no reason to suggest or to think, I'd suggest, that was going to be getting any better anytime soon. When you're talking about would it be for the next reassessment, that's when you're going to see the hard data. But the forecasting and the investors saying we think cap rates are going up, that's very relevant to what we're talking about today. And that's based on essentially a full year of the pandemic, from call it spring of 2020 to spring of 2021. So two very different considerations, but certainly the considerations as of our reference date all the signs were very much pointing between the business failures, the huge uptick in online retailing, all these things I've talked about, they're pointing to a higher risk for retail bricks and mortar, and particularly high for this, where you've got a captive audience that to a large part wasn't even there during 2020, resulting in those significant losses I talked about.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes this property. The next one on the docket is 443 Selkirk Avenue. And there are some preliminary issues. I guess we'll deal with the non-cooperation request first.
May I suggest this? And the reason I say this is I'm asking for class code and liability change, and the onus is on me for that. I'm wondering if I might present on that first, to the extent that there's on the value side, that there's a non-cooperation request. I may be seeking confirmation as to the assessed value issue only, but I wouldn't want that to be misconstrued as a request for confirmation on liability and classification. So however you want to handle it, but I'm happy to start with the classification and liability.
Darren, do you have any objections?
No objections.
Linda, any objections?
None, thank you.
Yeah,
No, I think that makes sense.
and I'm okay with it. So let's proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So in my brief then, and this will solely focus on liability and classification. If we could turn to page 16. And this property, it's owned and occupied by the Canadian Cultural Society of Manitoba, which we suggest is clearly a community association, service club, or other public body or group that serves the local community under section 23(1)(I) of the Municipal Assessment Act. So I list 23(1)(I) on page 16 in the middle of the page, and it states that real property is exempt from taxation for school purposes where the real property is owned by, which is the case here, a municipality, community association, service club, public recreation commission, or other public body or group that serves the local community and is not occupied, used, or operated for profit, but as a community hall, rec area, community center, or community ring. So in this case, that's precisely what I'd suggest, Mr. Chairman, precisely what's happening here. We have attached some materials from, shortened it to HCCS, and the objectives and history of the organization, and this is now at the bottom of page 16, it states that the Hungarian Canadian Cultural Society of Manitoba, Inc. was established in 1982. The society was created to allow Hungarian Canadians a meeting place to gather to share cultural traditions, events, heritage, and stories free from political or religious ideologies. Events occur all year that represent the traditions and customs of Hungary and its people. Some of these events include the celebration of the 1848 March 15th Revolution, the commemoration of the October 23rd, 1956 Revolution, the establishment of Hungary on August 20th, and the participation in Folklorama. And then moving on to page 17, weekly programming includes the Golden Age Club that meet Wednesdays to socialize, play Hungarian cards and chess. There's adult language classes offered for a variety of skills from beginner to advanced. Children are encouraged to participate in weekly activities that include cooking, Hungarian language, music, stories, and crafts to learn about Hungarian traditions. The Hungarian Cultural Society participates yearly in Folklorama under the name of Budapest Hungaria Pavilion. Preparing for Folklorama is a year-long endeavor that starts in January with sausage preparation and ends just a week before with cabbage roll making. And then it states the society's objectives are the following: to preserve the Hungarian literature, history, art, traditions, customs, and language, to maintain contact with other ethnic groups and organizations, to facilitate the integration of newly arrived Hungarian immigrants to Canada, to maintain contact with the Hungarians living in Hungary, and to promote Hungary among our Canadian friends. And so with those objectives and that those activities in mind, we'd certainly suggest in no uncertain terms that this would be fall squarely within the exemption, which talks about community association or service club. And that's we'd suggest what certainly the whole reason for the existence of the HCCS and its existence at this site. So starting at page 21, these are the materials, and I've highlighted them. I won't go through them all, but the materials are attached that indicates the objectives and the activities that I've just gone through. Starting at page 27, then, there's a number of other similar associations that are in fact school tax exempt, and we wanted to bring that to the board's attention. Page 27, it's the Portuguese Association of Manitoba, primarily school tax exempt with a taxable component, which I suggest was either a segment that wasn't being used and operated for the purposes of the Portuguese Association. And then continuing on from pages 28 through to 34, there's a number of other associations. They include the Barbados Association, the Irish Association, Scandinavian Cultural Center, Japanese Cultural Center, and German Society, Portuguese Center, again, actually I've read that twice, and the Komodo Center. So all of these, as you can see from those pages, they're all fully or mostly school tax exempt. There is an exempt, or I shouldn't say exemption, there is an exception from the exemption if a part of the premise is being used for purposes of I'll read it here, not used as licensed premises. So to the extent that the premise is used as a licensed premise under the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Control Act, they wouldn't be exempt, but those activities are not in place here. So we are suggesting that the entire building should be school tax exempt for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. And Darren, do you have any questions or comments?
I have like a voice art position or?
Certainly.
Okay, yeah, like we while they may fit the definition of community association and a service club, our concern with this, we had two concerns. The agent answered one, I believe. First, the facilities themselves have to be open and available to the general public in order to be considered a community hall or center. This means the facilities have to be available to non-members for use. And that is a key requirement for these types of facilities. The second concern that we had, and I believe the agent has answered that, is if any part of the facility is permanently licensed, we're not talking about temporary socials, we're talking about permanently licensed, then that would disqualify them from any exemption, as would any licensed lounges or bars, but I believe the agent has answered that. So those concerns, we just don't know. We haven't been able to confirm.
Okay, any comments on that?
Reply, recall that the definition, I appreciate Mr. Ducharme looking at it, but recall that the legislation talks about community association or service club though. And I guess I'd suggest, Mr. Chairman, that the service club component under section 23(1)(I), I believe you could look at it either way, but certainly this, if nothing else, this would fall squarely within a definition of a service club. But that would be my only comment.
Okay, thank you. Linda, any comments, questions?
So is this the first the city is hearing of this, or have you made, because I understand there's an application process for this, you apply to the city for?
The administrative application process, as far as I'm aware, was not done ahead of this hearing. Liability and classification were appealed under the act. And so I believe this is the first this would be the first time, unless Mr. Ducharme knows otherwise, this would be the first time that the department would have seen these materials when I submitted them to this board.
Okay, thank you. And how long has this club been in operation?
1982. I don't know how long they've been in this building, but I know they've been in this building for quite a while, and the Cultural Society was established in 82.
Okay, and if I could ask the city assessor a question as well. The places like the Irish Club, the Kubota Club, are you saying that they're constantly open to non-members or occasionally open to non-members? What's the criteria here?
Yeah, the criteria would be that they'd have to be available to non-members for the use of the premise. These other particular properties I wasn't able to delve into specifically the properties the agent presented.
But they all have the exemption.
They do.
They all have the exemption. And so part of your process once the application came forward would be that you would be checking those things?
Yeah, that'd be a key requirement that it would be open to the public as well.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions?
And just following up on that, if an exemption is granted, are there inspection processes that will take place to either confirm that or to deal with the confirmation that would have been otherwise required under the application process?
That would be my understanding, is that it would be, there would be follow-up
Okay.
to make sure that that it would be open to the general public.
And I apologize, I probably should have been directing my questions to Mr. Reimer at this point, not to Mr. Ducharme, but thank you for that. I'm looking at Mr. Reimer now, I'm looking at the materials that you provided at page 22 and 23. 23, I guess, is the one I'm looking at. First paragraph, currently there are 100 members with many non-members participating in events and weekly activities. Great. How does one become a member?
I believe you just apply to them and explain why you're applying and what, what your background is. But I do want to be very clear on this. Recall, Mr. Mann and Mr. Chairman, Service Club is typically not just open to the public all the time. And Service Club is specifically included under Section 23 of the Act, with the exemptions being granted to these other associations, which I believe, I'm not familiar, in great detail with them, but certainly from what I do know of them, they're performing the exact same functions that the subject is. This notion of having to be open all the time to members of the public, I disagree with that fundamentally based on the Service Club provision in the Act. But to answer your question, Mr. Mann, you do have to make application. I would imagine you would need to show your, either your background or your lineage with respect to your connection with Hungary and those kind of things, and possibly if you have no connection, become a member just through sort of trying to become more familiar with what they're doing.
Another question I have with respect to the use of the property, every example that you have provided, with the exception of the Japanese society, has both an institutional taxable and a taxable school tax exempt portion. Some of those, I assume, like Kubota Center, for example, I'm assuming as a result of the publicly available restaurant or
and licensed premises.
And licensed premises. Yeah. So there are no fully licensed premises on this.
No, not at this facility.
443A soccer.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Continuing further on that, on page 23. Do you have to know or be sponsored by a member in order to participate in events and weekly activities? In other words, you don't have to be a member, but non-members do participate.
That I don't know. You guys, and so do you have to attend the facility with a member in order to get in and participate?
Exactly.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Or could I just walk in there and
I understand the question.
participate in
I
it.
understand the question. Yeah, I guess I'd go back. I don't know the answer. I would go back to typically service clubs, which is in the definition. Typically, service clubs will require you to be either present with a member or to be a member. That's my experience. But that again doesn't disqualify it. That's what a service club is.
Okay, we'll just take a quick 5-minute recess. Get back to this. Because I have some discussions with panel members. It won't be long.
Sorry, I need to.
Yes. 5 minutes? Yeah.
We are live.
Thank you very much. We'll reconvene the hearing and with regard to the class code 40 school tax exemption, it will be contained in our final board order. Thank you. So let's proceed to the non-cooperation issue and Darren, let's just get your stuff up here. If you want to proceed with the request for non-co-op.
Okay. Go to the file number 22-1383, roll number 140-102-470-00. The address is 443 Selkirk Avenue for the roll year 2023 with a reference date April 1st, 2021. We have an assessed value of $404,000. The parcel use is CMRST, the zoning is C2, and we have a leasable area of 4,575 square feet. And we have a recommendation to maintain the 2023 assessed value due to non-compliance. The last income and expense mailers we received was in 2017. We're missing 2018, 19, and 20. So for 2020, the evidence starts on page 8 of my brief. On page 8, we have the delivery confirmation from Canada Post. And we see that Canada Post was unable to obtain a signature. On page 9, this is the delivery progress note from Canada Post confirming delivery, June 10th, 2021, 9:59 a.m. So the initial letters actually went out April 15th, 2021. This was the second notice that was sent out. The fact that the mail was not returned is sufficient for us to deem that the request was delivered and received. This aligns with the legislation in the City of Winnipeg Charter regarding notice by mail. Section 117.2 of the City of Winnipeg Charter deems mail to be received on the third day after it is mailed. Pages 10 through 17 show the information that was delivered to the owners of the subject property for which the information was not returned. On page 10 and 11, the cover letter sent to the owners. Page 12, instructions for completing the questionnaire. 13, the legislative authority. And then 14 through 17, the income and expense information sent but not returned. And that would conclude non-compliance.
Thank you very much. And Carrie, any comments?
I have no questions or comments.
And I guess we should take a quick recess.
Yeah. We are live.
Thank you very much. We'll reconvene the hearing. We have the assessor's request that the burden of proof be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation has been granted by this board. And Mr. Reimer, you can proceed with your presentation.
We simply request on, as to assessed value, we request a confirmation under 54(1) of the Act at this time.
Darren, any questions?
No questions.
And Linda?
No questions.
Ian? None. And Darren, you'll have to proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. On page 2, we have some aerial photos of the subject property. The top of page 2 is a parcel view of the subject property on Selkirk with Pritchard Avenue to the north and Salt Street to the east. The middle of page 2, we have an aerial view of the subject property facing Selkirk Avenue. And the bottom of page 2, we have a view directly above the subject property. On page 3 are some street view photos of the subject property. At the top is a photo passing the subject property on Selkirk. The middle of page 3, approaching the subject property. And on the bottom of page 3 is a photo at the back of the subject property. On page 4, a request for information. Below that, the subject sales history, of which there is no sales history for the subject property. And then are the subject rent comparables. It was difficult to find the same parcel use code and zoning that were located in the same region as the subject property. Generally had to go outside. Comparables 1, 2, 3, and 5 have the same parcel use code and zoning as the subject property. Comparable 4 has the same zoning as the subject property and is on the same street as the subject property. Subject 1 and Sargent is a similar size to the subject property. These comparable rents are main floor rents, which range from $12 per square foot to $14.99 per square foot. On page 5 is the subject property market income summary. We have a leasable area, a main level of 2,880 square feet, a basement of 1,695 square feet for a total of 4,575 square feet. This gives a potential rent of $43,094, which is a $942 blended rate per square foot. We have a vacancy loss of 6%, expenses at 3%, a shortfall at $7 per square foot, giving a net operating income of $37,371. We've applied an overall cap rate of 9.25%, giving an estimated value of $404,000 rounded. Page 6 are our capitalization rate chart. Page 7, the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. And then the rest of the brief is in regards to the non-compliance that was discussed.
Thank you. And Carrie, I assume you have no questions. Linda, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
And Ian?
No questions.
And I have no questions. So that concludes this property. The next one on the docket is 511 Selkirk Avenue. There are a preliminary issue on this class and liability, as well as assessed value, correct?
Indeed.
Okay. Harry, do you want to start with the class and liability first?
Absolutely. So we might turn to page 16. So this property is occupied by Manitoba Incorporated West End MCC Community Assistance Centering. This is a charitable organization that we're suggesting falls within the exempt provisions, and that it provides relief to aged, indigent, or sick persons and should fall within 23(1)(e) of the Act. I've listed 23(1)(e) there, where it talks about property being exempt from taxation for school purposes, where the real property is owned by or held in trust for and is used by a charitable organization. So that's key. Charitable organization primarily for the purpose of giving relief to or assistance to aged, indigent, or sick persons. In this case, we've attached the charitable registration information and confirming the objectives of the organization as relief of poverty. The proceeds from the sales at the thrift store that's at this location are used by MCC and its objectives to address basic human needs and working for peace and justice, and that's also indicated in the attached materials. The priorities of MCC are stated to be disaster relief, sustainable community development, and justice and peace building. Since the proceeds are used in this manner, we'd suggest that the subjects should qualify as the exemption under the 23(1)(e) as school tax exempt for providing relief to indigent or sick persons. If we turn to page 21. So this is the registration, the charitable registration through CRA for West End MCC Community Assistance Center Inc. As you can see there, charity type is relief of poverty, and the category is organizations relieving poverty. And so the requirement as to the charitable registration was met. And the following pages after that, I've summarized them as I had indicated. They talk about MCC's mandates and their objectives, and it includes, and I'll get there right on page 26. There's a number of paragraphs there, but it talks on the top of page 26 about priorities, and it says MCC's priorities in carrying out its purpose are disaster relief, sustainable community development, and justice and peace building. And then at the towards the bottom of page 26, the approaches, it states MCC approaches its mission by addressing poverty, oppression, and injustice and their systemic causes, accompanying partners and the church in a process of mutual transformation, accountability, and capacity building, building bridges to connect people and ideas across cultural, political, and economic divides, and caring for creation. So with that in mind, then what we're suggesting, and this is a case I know in the past, the difficulty that I've heard secondhand from the department is that MCC in and of itself, I don't believe there's a large debate about whether it should be school tax exempt, but the difficulty is more that this is perceived to be a step removed in that it's a retail operation, it's a thrift store, a retail operation, and therefore for this segment, this retail segment, there's might be some concern as to the school tax exemption. I guess I'd suggest, Mr. Chairman, and based on the materials here, as you can see, the West End Community Center that is owning and occupying the property is a charitable organization. That's a prerequisite for the exemption, but it's fully integrated with MCC and its objectives, which are certainly for the relief of poverty and helping indigent and sick persons. What happens here is all of the proceeds from, and I do mention this in my brief, but I'll just talk about it verbally, but all the proceeds from the sales at this location ultimately flow through. There's obviously no expectation of profit, and they don't operate for profit. The money flows to MCC, and then MCC distributes it for these purposes that I've talked about. The store itself is run through a combination of volunteer staff and through other individuals who they actually work with other community organizations like WASO and such to employ individuals who otherwise have significant challenges to employment absent that kind of initiative that they're taking. So I'd suggest that because of that integration with MCC as a whole, all the funds flowing for those charitable objectives, and further, because the operations themselves are through volunteers and through the direct employment of these individuals who otherwise have barriers to employment, it all fits in a very, very cohesive manner. And therefore, we are requesting that the school tax exemption apply in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, any questions, comments?
Yes, the department's position on thrift stores is they are for-profit operations to raise funds. It's the department's position that unless the care is being provided to the sick and indigent on site at that location, then it does not qualify for the exemption under this section of the Act. And this dates back to Court of Queen's Bench decision from 1982 by Justice Morse. And this is the position that we've advanced on all thrift stores in Winnipeg.
Thank you very much. And I think, Carrie, you are not surprised?
Actually, what Mr. Ducharme, I just actually recently found the document that's the department's referring to. It's actually an order, it's not a decision. So we have no way of knowing if it was a consent order or what went into it. There was no written decision. But the position of the department is not a surprise. I guess I'd refer back to the on-site thing. The volunteers is one thing, but when they're employing, when they're seeking out and trying to employ folks that through these other community organizations for individuals who otherwise have barriers, that I'd suggest is a further sort of strengthening of how the integration of this works. And there actually is some on-site relief for these persons. And also don't forget, Mr. Chairman, as far as the profits, it's not operated for profit. They rely on donations, and of course the funds aren't used for the purposes of enhancing or enlarging the store or anything like that. They're going directly to MCC to distribute for these charitable objectives. But that's the very distinction I was aware that the department is making.
Okay, thank you. Linda, any questions of either party?
So just to confirm, a thrift store such as the Salvation Army thrift store is not granted this exemption by the city under these rules?
That'd be correct.
That would be correct. And Mr. Reimer, how would you see the MCC operation being different from something like the Salvation Army? I understand that the Salvation Army runs in pretty much exactly the same way.
If they run exactly the same way, I would make the same argument. My caveat would be I'm not familiar enough with their operations and how it flows relative to this. So I won't comment on it further than that because I just don't know.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Ian.
I was going to ask about the Canadian Diabetes Association and their the treatment of the thrift stores, but I suspect the answer is the same. So I'll question about the Selkirk, and this is to Mr. Reimer. The Selkirk MCC is obviously related to the community or the MCC West End or West End MCC?
Yes. The West End MCC Community Assistance Center, which is the registered charity. So they're operating out of here. I don't know though beyond, like other than knowing the interaction between them and MCC generally, I'm not sure what formal ties they have with the West End. What other assistance they might provide in the area that I'm not familiar.
One of the reasons I asked that is because the page 21 of your materials where you've included the CRA information, the address is noted at Burnell Street, which is significantly removed from this address.
Yeah, that'll be the address they have for for their operations. But yes, so they don't just occupy this building, but this is the same organization, like the same entity that's in both locations.
Okay, thank you.
And I have no questions. So now we can proceed to value. And Darren.
Thank you. The file number is 22-1268. The roll number is 140-102-82000. The address is 511 Selkirk Avenue for the roll year 2023 with a reference date April 1st, 2021. We have an assessed value of $421,000. The parcel use is CMRSP. The zoning is C2 and the leasable area is 6,863 square feet. And the recommendation is to maintain the 2023 assessed value. Page 2, we have a couple of aerial photos of the subject property. At the top is a parcel view of the subject property on Selkirk between Salter and Andrew Street. And on the bottom of page 2, an aerial photo of the subject property facing Selkirk. At the top of page 3, we have a street view photo approaching the subject. The middle is a street view photo in front of the subject. And then the bottom of page 3 is a photo at the back of the subject property. On page 4, we have our requests for income information and the subject sales history. There's no recent sales for the subject. And then below that are the rent comparables. All comparables are standalone retail commercial properties, same as the subject. All comparables are zoned same as the subject. The comparables 2, 3, and 5 on 123 Marion and 625 Sargent are similar in leasable area to the subject property. On page 5 is the subject property market income summary. There's a main floor area of 2,854 square feet, a second floor area of 2,854 square feet, and then a basement area of 1,155 square feet, giving a total leasable area of 6,863 square feet. We arrive at a potential rent of $46,816 or $819, giving a blended rate of $6.82. We have a 6% vacancy, 3% expenses, a shortfall of $7 per square foot, giving a net operating income of 39,808 square feet. And we've applied a cap rate of 9.45%, giving an estimated value of $421,000. Page 6 is our cap rate chart. Page 7, the municipal excerpts. And then pages 8 through 13 are the returned 2020 income and expense mailers. And that would conclude my presentation.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions?
Just a couple. Mr. Ducharme, turning briefly to your page 4. And the rent comparables, and I think you alluded to this, these rents are all for main floor only without any second floor, right?
Yes, these are main floor rents. Yeah.
And the looking at the building ages, they range from 1972 to 2018. Turning to page 1, the subject was built in 1930, and I guess the department's put an effective age slightly newer at 1944. So this building is considerably older than any of those comparables, correct?
Yes, I wasn't able to find anything older for standalone commercial retail properties with similar zoning. Correct?
Yeah, no, I understand that difficulty completely. But these older buildings, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Ian.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
And I don't have any questions. So Carrie, you can proceed with.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could we turn to page 13? There's really only 2 issues. One is the potential market rent, and the other is the non-recoverable expense. So I'll leave that as per our previous discussions and comments. On page 13, then, the difference in market rent, we're applying a blended market rent. As you can see at the top chart, the area of 5,708, that's both for the main floor and the second floor, and in the basement area of 1155, we've listed separately. Our rents are slightly different on the basement area. There's really not a whole lot of difference there. The main difference relates to the rent for the levels above grade. And we're applying the 650 rate based on the information we were able to find on page 13 on that chart. So we've got a property on McDermott. It's a 1960 age, at least starting in March 14 at 867. Then we've got a property on Sherbrooke. Now this is a RESAM, which is typically dwelling units with main floor retail, significantly newer, and that was at 576. Then we've got a property on Isabel that is categorized actually as a warehouse, but it's got a retail use, much larger though, at 9,873 at 365 a foot. And then finally on Ellis Avenue, very similar vintage at 750 a foot. I'd suggest that the premise on Ellis might be the most comparable overall, but as Mr. Ducharme said, it's difficult to find truly comparable rents in this area for similar premises. At the 750 rate, and that's of course for main floor only, we believe that the 650 rate representing the main floor roughly 2,800 feet and the second floor at 2,800 feet certainly is consistent with those lease comparables, and have requested the 650 rate accordingly. So then if we move to page 15, as you can see, the main difference in the valuations relates to the rent. We've got a potential market rent of 40,567, and working that through using the 5% for non-recoverables. Or may we come in at a total value of $345,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, any questions?
Yes, in page 13, and you mentioned, for index number 3 being significantly larger, about 3 times as large.
Yes.
For larger property, and I understand it was difficult to find comparable stuff, but for larger properties, would you do economies of sale that's rents per square foot are generally lower?
Economies of scale, absolutely. That's the 365. We weren't. It's one of the rent comps I was able to find, but as you can see, we're not relying on the 365 rate for sure.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
And Ian?
Just one follow-up on that number 3 on Isabel Street, the index number 3 to 365. You indicate you're not relying on that amount, but that amount has gone into your calculation of the average and the median. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So here's the total premise area for Isabel is 9873, very low rent, 365. That is the all main floor rent. So recall that the rental rates for second floors, especially in a building like this, are typically a lot lower than main. So we believe if one averages out, and I should have probably done this instead, but in our calculation, the 5708 square feet, that's, call it half main floor and half second floor. That would be more consistent with a rent of say $8 on the main floor and $5 on the second floor. The 365, the premise area is larger, 9873, but it's also all on main floor. So we believe it's fair to put it in as an indicator, given that we're talking about a two-story premise here. But when I say I'm not relying on it, I'm not suggesting 365 a foot for either main or second floor. We're using higher rates.
Okay, thank you.
And I have no questions, so that concludes this property. The next one on the docket is 125 Enfield Crescent, and are there any preliminary issues on this one?
No.
I hope not.
Okay, Darren, you can proceed.
Thank you. The file number is 22-879. The roll number is 060-910-72500. The address is 125 Enfield Crescent for the roll year 2023 with a reference date April 1st, 2021. We have an assessed value of $239,000. We have a parcel use of CMRST, zoning of C2, and a leasable area of 1,344 square feet. Our recommendation is to maintain the 2023 assessed value. Page 2, at the top is a parcel view of the subject property on Enfield Crescent, which is in the Norwood East neighborhood, and it's close to the intersection of Taché as well as St. Mary's Road. The middle photo is an aerial view of the subject property behind the tree facing Enfield Crescent and to a lesser extent St. Mary's Road. And on the bottom is an aerial view of the back of the subject property, which has access on Hanbury Street. On page 3, we have some street view photos of the subject property from different angles. The top photo is a photo of the subject property from Enfield Crescent. You'll note that the subject's a converted residence, which was fully converted to commercial in 1988. The middle photo, street view photo of the subject from St. Mary's Road. And then the bottom of the photo is a street view photo of the back of the subject property. I'd like you to note that the cream colored building facing Hanbury Street are a couple of my comparables, 196A and 196B Taché. On page 4 is the subject sales history. There is no recent sales history. And below that, we have our rent comparables. So 130 Marion is in the same neighborhood as the subject property, is same parcel use and same zoning as the subject property, and has the similar area as the subject property. And this is a second floor rent. 196 Taché Avenue was in the previous photo there. It's in the same neighborhood, same parcel use and same zoning as subject property and of similar size. It's an older lease in 2018. And I'd suggest slightly inferior to the subject in terms of it being tucked behind Taché Avenue. 196B Taché, same zoning and same parcel use code and of similar size to the subject property. And this is a very old lease, 2015. So a time adjustment would be required for that. And 196 Taché, this one is in the same part of the same building. Obviously, it actually faces Taché and would be more comparable to the subject property in terms of exposure to traffic. 315 Kennedy, there are two comparables there. These are in an adjacent neighborhood to the subject property. They have the same zoning as the subject property and the same parcel use code as the subject property. On page 5 is a subject property market income summary. We have a first floor area, 672 square feet, a second floor area, 672 square feet for a total of 1,344 square feet. Giving a potential rent of $18,197. We have a 6% vacancy loss, expenses at 3%, a shortfall at $7 per square foot, giving a net operating income of $16,028. We've applied an overall cap rate of 6.7% and giving an estimated value of $239,000. Page 5, our cap rate chart, we've applied a 6.7% to the subject property, which is at near or even above the 80th percentile for all reports for retail. Page 7 is the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. Pages 8 through 18 consist of the 2020 income and expense mailers we had received back from the owner. And I believe that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Gary, any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeHerm, you attach the income and expense mailer, and we can agree if we turn briefly to your page 15. We can agree that Ferguson, this property is leased entirely to Ferguson Therapies, and the total annual net rent is $15,960, correct? That's the $1436.40 times 12.
Correct.
Okay. And that's $12.60 a square foot. Correct. If you haven't calculated that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. No problem. And then turning briefly to your page 5, the remainder of the parameters, just to be clear, those are all model driven from vacancy down through cap, correct?
Correct.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Ian?
No question, thank you.
And I just have one question. There's a basement on this dwelling, 672 square feet. Is it put to any use?
I don't think we have a basement.
Because it's shown on your page 1.
Yeah, I see that there. It's not part of our valuation. As far as I know, the subject prior, I have a couple plans here. We just have a main. Second floor. Oh, there is a basement. I'm sorry. We have not valued the basement. It's it consists of just storage, utility room. There is a washroom in the basement, but it's not part of our evaluation. It's the first floor and second floor.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question. And Carrie, you can proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. To answer that question, the lease that's in place is for the entire house, now used for commercial purposes, including use of the basement, the leasable area. The owner is not considering the basement to be have a separate rental value. They're simply valuing it based on the main floor and second floor above grade, and that's the 1360 they've applied and on which rent is paid. So if we go to page 15 briefly, there's not a lot of difference in our respective valuations. There is a difference with respect to rental rate, and there's also a difference with respect to capitalization rate. So Ferguson Therapies, they are leasing the entire building at a net rate of $12.60 a square foot, and that's based under the March 2016 lease for a 10-year term. Actually, the landlord was quite happy to secure this tenant. Had been vacant for some time prior to that. So at the $12.60 a foot, that results in a potential market rent of $17,237. I note that that's only about $900, give or take, difference than what the departments put on it. So the differences are not huge. However, given the older age of this asset, given the capitalization rate evidence that we've submitted, I would classify this property as average quality at best, if not closer to lower quality. And therefore, we've applied a rate of 7.25% in our valuation. These converted residences, they're all well and good if they're leased, but certainly if you don't have a party that wants that kind of setup, then they can prove to be quite difficult. And as I say, there were some vacancy issues prior to Ferguson Therapies finally coming in here, and we believe this 7.25 is appropriate. To the extent that the board wishes to do so, again, there's not much difference in the potential rent, but on page 13, we've attached a chart of some rental rates on 100 million. That would be a superior location, but then other ones on Provencher, St. Mary's, Marion, and the rental rates are listed there. The 1260, we believe, is certainly consistent with that range, and particularly since it's over the two floors, and we therefore conclude that the rental rate is well within market and would request that the board buy that rate when valuing the subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Darren, any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Linda?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Ian?
I don't have any questions.
I have one. Is that 2016 lease, is there a step up clause in it?
That is a very good question, and I'm going to check. If we could go to page 23. And Mr. Chairman, based on this, I caveat this only with the statement that I haven't specifically asked further about it, but I have treated this as the 143640 being payable for the entire term, as you see on the tenant verification form there. So to that extent, I'm going to suggest there isn't, but I have not asked the owner that specific question.
Okay, that was my only question. So that concludes this property. The next property on the docket is 970 St. Mary's Road. Any issues on this one?
Yes. I guess again, this is an interesting one. Initially, this property consisted of 2 units and a storage garage. And in 2019, the unit at 970 St. Mary had a roof collapse. It was so bad that the building was demolished. So I prepared my brief with the anticipation or understanding that this unit would be valued as being demolished. And I was prepared to make a recommendation to the applicant. It came out that we're still valuing this property with the old building still there. The 2023 came out with the old building still there. So I've since learned that the new building has been completed, which has effective December 20th, 2022, which was about the same time these briefs were due. So there will be a supplemental issued in the near future, and I'm wondering if it's necessary, if we should be continuing. And I understand the agent probably was under the assumption that this assessment was based on the new building.
So. If you've read the materials, there's a roof collapse on a significant part of the building. That unit was 1,900 square feet, which is the bulk of what the department and we have presented in our respective valuations. I am going to note, and the reason I guess, and to be fair, Mr. Ducharme and I only had a chance to review this very briefly late yesterday, so we haven't had a lot of time to talk about it. For 2020, I also had conducted this field with Mr. Ducharme wasn't involved, but at that time, Mr. Pontinia and we went up and inspected it. We walked into the four walls with no roof and blue sky. And okay, so we're going to make an amendment, and we reduced the value from 447, which was based on presumably similar to what Mr. Ducharme submitted, to 107,000. That was intended to reflect the physical assessment. I am concerned that the department's suggesting that a further supplementary would issue, because the physical asset they're showing here, notwithstanding that the roof's been replaced, the physical asset is the same. The leasable area hasn't changed, and nothing else has changed. So my question, I guess, would be to Mr. Ducharme, Mr. Chairman, because I'm trying to look forward and figure out the best way to do this. Mr. Ducharme, the reduction from in the previous assessment to 107,000, was it your suggestion? Was your recommendation going to be at something that is very close to that? Because then I'm certainly willing to just go with that recommendation, wait for the sub, and then have the discussion. I certainly could not have the notion stand that the assessment of 541, that there should be a further supplementary on that. From our perspective, there's a significant, we have some concerns with evaluation based on the renovated asset with the roof in place. So I guess my question might be, what was your thoughts on the recommendation for the asset when it had the damage and wasn't leasable?
Yeah, I did. I became aware of it when I looked at your brief that the new building was in place, effective at the end of the central and east review. And I didn't delve into specifically or get any further into what the recommendation would be, just based on how it looked at the present time.
Can I then just ask a couple of questions? Maybe we can cut to the heart of it. Mr. Ducharme and Mr. Chairman, can we turn to page 5 of the department's materials? So, Mr. Ducharme, just to be clear, the unit that we're talking about that was the subject of the roof collapse and was, of course, not leasable and only is becoming leasable now. That's the 1,900 square foot unit. Premise ID 8079, correct?
Correct.
Okay. With that in mind, then, Mr. Chairman, may we take 5 minutes, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
We'll recess for 5 minutes. Coming back at 11:06. Aaron, do you have a second?
Yeah.
We are live.
Thank you very much. We'll reconvene the hearing this morning for 970 St. Mary's Road. And gentleman, who wants to go first?
Perhaps if I can walk through this with the board. Mr. Ducharme and I had a chance to talk. We think we have a good solution. Could I ask the board members and Mr. Ducharme to turn to the department's brief on page 5? That's going to give you the flow of what we're suggesting here. Okay. So recall, Mr. Chairman, at the top or on page 5, I'd asked Mr. Ducharme, and that is our position as well. The unit that we're talking about that was where the roof collapsed is the first unit of 1,900 square feet. So what we're suggesting for the purposes this morning are to take out that unit entirely, the income, and take it out of the square footage, because the SUP is going to issue adding the square footage back in, and then just valuing the property net of that unit for our purposes this morning, using everything else the same as shown on page 5, and I'll go through those numbers with the board members to come up with a notional value net of that unit, and then when the sub comes out, we'll have the discussion. So the revised potential income is 17,357.
Okay, just hang on. Okay,
And then the vacancy allowance is $1,041.
based on 6%.
6%, yeah, of that lower number. So then the effective gross income, and this is just going row by row from page 5, the effective gross income is 16,316. The revised expense allowance, using 3% for the reasons I've talked about, that we'll just go with that, is $489.
Okay,
The revised shortfall amount is $648.
based on $7 a square foot.
Yeah, and the lower area though, but using the, okay.
Right.
And then the revised NOI is 15,179. And then capped at 7.2. The precise value is 210,819. Rounded to 211,000. So if that meets with the boards and Mr. Ducharme's approval, that's what our suggestion, or not the boards, but Mr. Ducharme's approval, that's what I'd suggest we would, the recommendation we would make, subject to issuing the supplementary.
Well, Mr. Ducharme's going to have to agree to it,
Yes,
make the same recommendation.
I will fully agree, yeah, this.
And is the understanding a sub will be issued?
Yes.
Okay, Linda, any questions?
No, that's fine with me.
Ian?
Not now, thank you.
And I have no further questions. Thank you. Okay, the next property on the docket is 129 B Marion, and I understand, Carrie, there is 54-1 request on this.
Yeah.
Okay, Darren, you'll have to make your presentation, and then after the presentation, Carrie can just make his request.
The file number is 22-2452. The roll number is 060-908-23000. The address is 129 Marion Street. For the roll year 2023, a reference date April 1st, 2021, we have an assessed value of $399,000. The parcel use is CMRSD, zoning C2, and we have a leasable area of 2,640 square feet. A recommendation is to maintain the 2023 assessed value. On page 2, a couple of photos of the subject property. The top is a parcel view photo of the subject property. And on the bottom of page 2 is an aerial view of the subject property facing Marion. Top of page 3 is an aerial photo of the subject property from the back. The middle of page 3 is a street view photo of the subject property. And the bottom of page 3 is a street view photo of the back of the subject property. Page 4 are the requests for information at the top, followed by the subject sales history. There's no recent sales history for the subject property. And below that are the rent comparables. There's 130 Marion. Basically most of the comparables are on the same street as the subject property. They range in rent from $13 per square foot to $19.15 per square foot. And they're all same parcel use code and same zoning as subject property. On page 5 is the subject property market income summary. We have a total leasable area of 2,640 square feet with a potential rent of $30,000, $756. We've applied vacancy of 6%, expenses 3%, shortfall of $7 per square foot, giving a net operating income of $26,935. We have a cap rate of 6.75%. Giving an estimated value of $399,000. Page 6 is the cap rate chart. Page 7 are municipal act excerpts. And pages 8 through 13 are the returned 2020's subject property income and expense tables. That would be the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions, Carrie? Question. Linda, any questions?
No questions.
Ian?
None for me, thanks.
And I have no questions, so Carrie, you can restate your request.
If we might request confirmation under 54(1) of the Act.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last property in the docket today is 196 Taché. Any issues on this one? No. Okay, Darren, you can proceed.
So you have file number 22-961. Rule number 060-910-70000. The address is 196 Taché. The roll year for the roll year 2023 with the reference date April 1st, 2021. We have an assessed value of $401,000. Parcel use is CMRST, zoning is C2, and we have a leasable area of 2,368 square feet. The recommendation is to maintain the 2023 assessed value. Top of page 2 is a parcel view of subject property on Taché Avenue, located in the Norwood East neighborhood. At the bottom of page 2 is an aerial photo of the subject property facing Taché, which is circled in the photo. The top of page 3 is another aerial photo from a different angle of the subject property. The middle of page 3, we have a street view photo approaching 196 Taché from St. Mary's Road, of which one tenant is located there. And on the bottom of page 3, a street view photo approaching 196B and 196A Taché, of which there are 2 further tenants who have access through this street. On page 4 is the subject sales history. And below that are the rent comparables. We have 130 Marion, which is in the same neighborhood, has the same parcel use code and same zoning as subject. This rent is a second floor rent. 125 Onfield Crescent is in the same neighborhood as subject, same parcel use code, same zoning as subject. 316 Taché is the same parcel use code, same zoning, and it's in an adjacent neighborhood to the subject property. 129 Marion is in an adjacent neighborhood to the subject property. It is zoned the same as the subject property and is also CMRST. And the 2 on 315 Kennedy is an adjacent neighborhood to the subject property, and they're both CMRST and zone C2. On page 5 is a subject property market income summary. We have a total leasable area, 2,368 square feet, providing a potential rent of $29,862, which is $12.61 per square foot blended rate. Our expenses are at 3%. Vacancy at 6%, expenses 3%, shortfall $7 per square foot, giving a net operating income of $26,233, and we've applied a cap rate of 6.55%, giving an estimated value of $401,000 rounded. On page 6 is our cap rate chart, and you'll note the 6.55% that we applied to the subject property is near or above the 80th percentile for retail for all reports. Page 7, the municipal act excerpts. And pages 8 through 18 are the 2020 income and expense mailers we have received back from the owners. And you'll note the reported rents on page 15 that the blended rate is 13.57 per square foot, and our model is $12.61 per square foot blended. That would end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions?
Just to confirm, Mr. Ducharme, these are model driven parameters right from rents all the way through to cap rate, correct?
That would be correct.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's my question.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Ian?
And I have no questions, thank you.
And I have no questions, so Carrie, you can proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could we please turn, and this will be brief, can we please turn to page 15 of our materials? I have the advantage of having Mr. Ducharme's brief in front of me, so I'll summarize just so the board's aware. On page 15, our potential rent in this case is actually about $2,200 higher than what the department has derived through the model. Our rents are based, and you need not go there, but they are based on the rents in place that's set out for the board's reference on page 13. The rents are dated between 2015 and 2020, so one of them is very current, and they're within certainly the range of the chart that I've submitted on page 13. So our rents are slightly higher, our vacancy allowance is the same, and our non-recoverables are at 5%. But what that actually leads to, as you can see on page 15, is an NOI of $27,106. That is still $800 higher than what the department's got through the model parameters. So we are a tick higher on the NOI, and it all comes down to cap rate. From our perspective, this building, it's a 1991 building, but it's got limited exposure to taché. It's running north-south, and 2 of the 3 tenants actually had no exposure to taché. They were running through doors on the back. From our perspective, this would be an average quality building at best. And based upon those considerations, we're suggesting a cap rate of 7.25% in this case. And therefore request a reduction to the value of $374,000 as shown on page 15. Thank you.
Thank you. Darren, any questions?
No questions.
Linda, any questions?
No questions.
Ian?
No questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions, so that concludes this property. We have heard all of the items scheduled this morning, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.